You ever look at the big financial news, the billion-dollar deals, the wild stock market swings, and feel like it's all happening in a totally different universe? Well, today, we're going to connect those worlds. We're going to show you how these massive headlines are actually part of one single story, a story that affects every single one of us. So let's dive in.
Okay, just look at this number, $450 billion. Let that sink in for a second. That's almost $500 billion. What in the world could a number that big even represent? The GDP of a small country? Maybe? A massive government project?
Nope, that's how much value one single company, Amazon, lost in just 10 days. It was the stock's worst losing streak since 2006. And get this, it wasn't because the company was failing. It was because it was making an absolutely massive bet on the future. So, when a company decides to bet the farm on what's coming tomorrow, what does that actually mean for the rest of us today? How do these high-stakes corporate gambles ripple all the way down to our everyday lives? Let's connect those dots. All right, first up, billion-dollar bets. We're talking about what some are calling corporate future-proofing. So, yeah, that $450 billion hit that Amazon took, it happened because investors got seriously spooked. They weren't reacting to bad sales numbers or anything like that. They were reacting to the sheer scale of Amazon's spending plans for the future. And just how big are those plans? $200 billion. That's what Amazon is planning for capital expenditure, the big long-term investments, for this year alone. That's a nearly 60% jump from last year, and almost all of it is pouring into one thing: artificial intelligence. But here's the fascinating part. While the market was panicking, Amazon CEO Andy Jassy was cool as a cucumber. He basically told analysts, "Don't worry, I'm confident this is going to pay off big time down the road." It's that classic tug of war, right? Short-term fear versus long-term vision. And it's not just Amazon making these kinds of moves. Ford is making a similar, though smaller, bet on its own future. They're dropping $5 billion to completely rethink how they build electric vehicles. In fact, Ford's CEO is calling it their new Model T moment. The plan is to roll out an affordable $30,000 electric pickup to go head-to-head with Tesla and the big Chinese brands. And they're making this huge push even as the EV market is, showing signs of slowing down. It's another giant gamble on where the world is headed. Now, these huge bets, they do more than just spend money. They also signal a major shift in where power and capital are located. And that brings us to our next section, power in flux. Just take a look at the journey of the tech giant Palantir. They were born and raised in Silicon Valley, but in 2020, they packed up and moved to Denver, kind of thumbing their nose at the Valley's culture. And now, they're on the move again, this time to Miami, joining this big wave of capital and executives heading to Florida for its, friendlier tax environment. And you see this happening in the world of sports, too. The legendary LA Lakers were just sold at a mind-blowing $10 billion valuation. The Buss family, who'd owned the team forever, basically said that to compete at the very top of the NBA today, you need resources that are just on a whole other level. It's another clear sign of power and major assets changing hands. So these big shifts in financial power are happening at the same time as a totally different kind of shift, a kind of reckoning, a wave of accountability. And this brings us to the fallout from the release of the Epstein files. To make sure we're all on the same page, here's a brief, factual timeline based on our source material. After a plea deal back in 2008 and Epstein's death in 2019, the story took a sharp turn this year. The Department of Justice released millions of documents, and that triggered a whole new wave of consequences. Now, this is absolutely critical, and I'm quoting directly from the source material here. Being mentioned in the Epstein files does not mean that someone was implicated in any of the crimes. Our focus right now is not on allegations, but on the documented, professional fallout for some very high-profile individuals. And that fallout has been pretty widespread. This table just shows you a few examples. We're talking about the chief legal officer at Goldman Sachs, the chairman of a major law firm, the chairman of Hyatt Hotels, the CEO of Dubai's largest port operator. All have either resigned or stepped down from their roles after these files were released. Okay, so we've seen the billion-dollar bets, the massive shifts in power, the high-stakes reckoning. Now let's bring it all back home. Let's talk about how this all connects to your financial reality. Let's start with a simple question. If you got hit with a surprise $1,000 bill tomorrow, car breaks down, unexpected medical expense, could you cover it?
Well, a recent Bankrate survey asked that exact question, and a shocking 53% of Americans, that's more than half the country, said no. It really shows you how financially fragile things are for so many households.
And that fragility is being tested all the time. I mean, just look at buying a used car, a huge expense for so many families. J.D. Power says the average price has rocketed up nearly 30% in just 5 years. It went from about $23,000 to over $30,000. That makes it so much harder to replace a car, let alone handle a sudden costly repair.
Now, a new law called the Secure Act 2.0 was actually designed to help with this. It lets you take out $1,000 from your 401k for an emergency. Sounds great, right? Well, here's the catch. A Vanguard report found that a staggering 96% of employers haven't even enabled this feature. So this potential lifeline is just out of reach for most people.
And it's a similar story with student loans. On one hand, there's good news. Over 40,000 borrowers became eligible for forgiveness in January. But at the exact same time, there's this enormous backlog, with over 626,000 people just stuck, waiting for their applications for more affordable plans to get processed. It feels like for every one person who gets through the door, there's a huge line still waiting outside. Which brings us right back to that central question. We're living in this world where giant corporations are betting hundreds of billions on an AI-powered future, while at the same time, more than half the country can't afford a $1,000 surprise. So as the titans of our economy place these colossal bets on tomorrow, you have to ask, are we as a society doing enough to make sure everyone is prepared for today?